Hi everyone. Today we are going over the art of filmmaking. Filmmaking has never really been included inside the discussion of art, but it's nevertheless a great expression for people to record and make a movie. And today we're going to talk about transitions. Transitions, you don't really think of them as being important while you're watching a movie, but they're actually extremely important in order to achieve a very nice flow or make it seem like it's a storytelling, and it can affect the tone of the speaker very drastically, depending on which type of transition you choose. So the first one we're going to cover is called cutting on action. So it is cutting from one shot to the other while the subject is still in motion. So you can see this a lot in like action movies where they will turn the camera around while like two people are probably like fighting each other. And it kind of gives like this very expansive view of the whatever sequence is happening. And it kind of gives the reader this sort of like almost omniscient sort of look on whatever's happening. Next, we have a cutaway. And it is cutting to an insert show of a scene and then back again. And it can be in the same scene as the character, and it can be used to get inside the head of a character. So cutaway is basically when you can like flash like a different scene while this person is, for example, shown to be thinking. And it's all like involved in like the same sequence, but it can be used to show like if a person is like reminiscing and thinking back to their childhood. A cutaway scene can be shown to use like a clip that shows an experience that he had when he was just a child, and that can be used to show like, oh, this is what the character is thinking. Since movies, a lot of them don't use like narration, they aren't the same as books. It's very difficult sometimes to show exactly what the main character is thinking. So cutaway scenes are super important in order to convey information to the reader, and to show what the main character is thinking about. Next, we have a crosscut. So crosscut is also used for a lot of action scenes, and cutting back and forth between locations. Phone calls is also a huge use for them, and it can be kind of used to show like these interaction between two characters. They don't even have to be like near each other in distance, but it kind of shows like how they're interacting, how they're talking to each other, their expressions, and the individual impact of what they're saying to each other. It can also create this sort of like very tense feeling when they are talking. For example, you can make them express anger at this person, and then the person is shown to be also very aggressive, and it can really convey exactly their relationship almost. So crosscuts are very important when showing the relationships between two characters. Next, we have a jump cut. So these are intercuts between the same shot, show the passing of time, adds levels of urgency to scenes. For example, there are a lot of jump cuts in baseball scenes. So jump cuts, sometimes they like cut out some scenes in the middle, sometimes they like lengthen it in between. And it's really used to show a passing of time. It's often used to make things smoother. And so in baseball scenes, they might like cut out a little bit in the middle where like he's aiming or he's shooting, so that it makes the overall, when he like hits the ball, it's more significant, and it's much more impactful. So jump cuts are really important for action scenes as well, where they can kind of where the reader doesn't have to suffer through like every single moment in between where like he's like setting things up, but rather just move to the action scene and adds a lot more impact and interest. Yeah.
The next transition is called a match cut, and this is usually incorrectly referred to as a jump cut, and this basically cuts from one shot to a similar shot by matching an action or composition. And this can also be matched be matched with audio, and it doesn't always have to be a visual. So a match cut usually gives like the audience a really flowing story, and it's a way of storytelling to engage in the to like let the audience engage in the movie. And this is really useful, especially when you're cutting from um an action to a different action with the same composition. So next is fade in and fade out. And this is a really common transition that's used in filmmaking, and it's basically dissolving from black or to black. And this is used in the beginning of the movie where they slowly dissolve from black to a colorful scene, or at the end of the movie where they dissolve a really colorful scene to a black scene or the ending scene. Next is dissolved, and this is most commonly used in montages, which is an older form of filmmaking, and it's not really commonly used now. And this can represent a passing of time, and it dissolves from one shot to another. It can also dissolve in the same shot, and it's usually the disappearance of something. So, for example, in one shot, if you want a man to slowly age to an elderly man, then you would sort of like dissolve its facial features so that it looks older. Or for example, in a shot, for example, if a man is turning into a werewolf, you would slowly like dissolve and morph the features and structures of a werewolf together to kind of show like a time has passed and this person has turned into a different character. Next is a J cut. A J cut is basically an audio from the next scene that starts before you get to it. And you usually hear what's going on before you could see what's going on in the scene. And this is subtle editing techniques that people may not notice in a movie. And a J cut and an L cut, which we'll be explaining later on, are designed to create seamless flow and transitions with audio guiding. And this is great for revealing an element in a scene. For example, if during a scene a man is walking down the street and he accidentally steps on a piano, and before the camera moves down to the scene where the man steps on the piano, it plays the sound before like it shows where the piano is located at. So for example, the man is walking down the street and all of a sudden you hear like the sound of a piano playing, and then it slowly moves to that piano. So that's like an example of a J cut. You hear the audio before you see where the audio is actually coming from. And next is an L cut, and this is an audio based transition. So it's kind of similar to a J cut, but not really. It's like an audio from a current shot that carries on to the next shot. So in J cut, it's where the audio comes up before you see the scene, and an L cut is where the audio continues to the next scene or the next shot. And this doesn't have to be a scene transition. It can also be used when characters are talking to each other. For example, you have two characters on a boat. One character can be on the paddock and one character can be indoors, and an L cut can be used when the character on the paddock is listening to the voice of the character that's indoors, and this is an example of an L cut.
So our next type of transition is the smash cut, where it's like an abrupt transition between two different scenes, where the scenes go from intense to quiet or quiet to intense, for example. And so a situation where you would use a smash cut is where, say in like the Avengers or something, there are people fighting outside, but you would use a smash cut to go from, suddenly the fighting to people talking indoors or in a separate area. So our next type of transition is an iris transition. And so an iris transition is a stylistic choice used by many different filmmakers or like game creators when using cutscenes. So iris transitions are where the filmmaker or game creator draws the attention of the viewer from one object or one scene to a different scene in a bit of a, well, like a smoother transition, not quite a dissolve, but it's still drawing attention from one thing to another. So a wipe is pretty self-explanatory. There are many different kinds of wipe, but all of them revolve around the main idea that the entire set is basically wiped and clean. So it's it's a blank slate that you can rebuild your scene from. So next is an invisible cut. It's supposed to give the impression that it's all one continuous take. However, cuts are hidden like in the background or in blackness. They can also be hid by camera motion or when the subject enters or leaves the frame. So many different movies have used invisible cuts, and they're often really hard to spot because invisible cuts are, of course, hidden. So here are some citations that we use to determine, like, yeah.
And next I'll be moving on to creative combinations. So basically creative combinations is combining the basic elements of transitions together, and it's using the different transitions that was talked about earlier and create like different kinds of cuts. For example, you can combine a match cut to a J cut. You can and instead match the composition or action of a specific scene using an audio instead. So that's like a combination of match cut and J cut. And you can also have a verbal match J cut, which is where you have like different characters from different scenes saying like the same sentence. So instead of like the audio background noise, it's like verbal, which is two characters talking to each other. So for example, you can have one character from a hamburger shop saying I want, and another character from let's say an ice cream shop saying I want to, and then it kind of creates this like flow in the storyline. So it's different characters from different scenes, like I guess experiencing the same thing and saying the same line, and it jumps to different scenes. And next is cross-cutting and cutaway, which is also a form of creative combinations. And next is match dissolve, which is kind of self-explanatory. You basically take a match cut, but instead of just matching the two the two scenes, you kind of dissolve them to each other. For example, you can have a man in a baseball field and he's walking, and then all of a sudden it kind of dissolves or matches to a scene where he's walking in a department store. So that's a form of match dissolve. And then you can have morph match cut, which we kind of discussed earlier on. It's where it's that example I gave of a man slowly turning into a werewolf. So that's kind of like a morph match cut, like you're morphing a man into a werewolf. So that's a form of creative combination.
All right, that's the end of today's lesson. Thank you all for watching or tuning in, and yeah, that's it. Thank you.